Hello and welcome to the Luv Doc podcast with hosts Waldo Wachewski and Ophelia Brewski.
What happens when the quote-unquote chillest city in the world suddenly feels like a badly moderated comment section?
Oh, that is such a good way to put it.
Right. I mean, usually when you look at a map of a city, we expect it to just show us geography. You know, you see the streets, the rivers, the zoning lines.
Yeah, it's just structural, a physical blueprint.
Exactly. The map just points and says, here is downtown.
Yeah.
And physical blueprints are totally objective, which makes them really easy to agree on.
True. There's not much to argue with there.
But then you read something that tries to map out the psychology of a city, like the mood, the vibe. And suddenly that objective map just goes right out the window.
Oh, completely. It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Right, because we're looking at a cultural landscape that is just incredibly murky now. We're trying to figure out how a community's baseline personality went from laid back to deeply hostile.
And trying to pinpoint exactly when and why a population's collective temperament shifted. That is notoriously difficult to do without, getting tangled up in nostalgia and personal bias.
Oh, for sure. Or just a longing for a past that maybe never quite existed the way we remember it, which is actually the perfect setup for today's Luv Doc.
Yes, I am really excited about this one. And the focus is Austin, Texas, right?
That is.
Yeah.
But the mission for this Luv Doc is to unpack how this one localized column perfectly encapsulates a much, much larger conversation.
A really heavy conversation, honestly.
Totally. We're unpacking the mechanics of pandemic burnout, the gentrification of cool culture, and deep systemic political polarization. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the letter that kicks off the column.
Right. The one written by Crabby in Clarksville.
Yes, Crabby in Clarksville.
And just for context, Clarksville is a historic neighborhood in Austin that has become, increasingly affluent over the years.
Which sets the socioeconomic scene for this letter perfectly.
Exactly. Crabby is writing from a place of relative stability, yet they're outlining this very visceral, lived experience of societal breakdown on a micro level.
Yeah, and the specific complaints Crabby lists are going to sound so familiar to you, honestly, no matter where you live.
Oh, definitely. It's universal at this point.
Crabby talks about people cutting you off in traffic, treating service workers horribly, ignoring basic social contracts like waiting in lines.
Is it complaining incessantly?
Yeah. But the phrase that serves as the thesis for Crabby's whole letter is when they ask the Luv Doc how to keep a sense of humor when Austin feels more and more like a badly moderated comment section.
I mean, that is just a brilliant, chilling metaphor.
It really is.
Because it describes exactly how digital behaviors are bleeding into our physical spaces. Think about the architecture of an unmoderated comment section,
It's just total chaos.
Right. It's a space devoid of immediate physical consequences. The loudest, most aggressive, most selfish voices naturally dominate.
While the reasonable people either just log off or get shouted down.
Exactly. And Crabby is feeling that exact digital dynamic manifesting on the physical streets of their city, that algorithmic reward for hostility.
Like people are treating the grocery store checkout line the way they treat a Twitter thread.
Yes, that is exactly it.
But I gotta ask, is it possible Crabby is just, getting older?
The classic get off my lawn syndrome.
Right. Because I think anyone who reaches a certain age starts looking around and thinking the world has lost its manners.
It's a fair question.
So is this hyper-individualism a legitimate, measurable new reality? Or is Crabby just experiencing the natural, cynical progression of aging and burnout?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the Luv Doc captures that exact internal struggle within Crabby.
Wait, Crabby actually realizes this?
Yeah. Crabby actually asks that same question. They literally say, is it me or is it the world? They aren't just complaining blindly, they're actively trying to do the work.
Oh, right. They mentioned practicing mindfulness and stuff.
Exactly. Doing deep breathing exercises, counting their blessings, and trying to patiently consider the motives of the people being rude to them.
Which, that sounds exhausting.
It is.
It's the sheer cognitive load of constantly auditing your own sanity. Like you go out trying to be zen, someone aggressively steals your parking spot, and now you have to spend 20 minutes doing breath work just to keep your nervous system regulated.
It really highlights a glaring modern paradox.
How so?
Well, we have access to more tools for mindfulness, therapy, and personal peace than any generation in history, but we're deploying them in an environment that is increasingly chaotic.
Wow, yeah.
The tragedy of Crabby's letter is all that energy spent just trying to maintain a baseline level of mental neutrality in a society that constantly demands friction.
And that friction leads us right to Crabby's big lingering question at the end of their letter, which is, where have all the slackers gone?
Ah, yes, the slackers.
Yeah.
The mythical heartbeat of old Austin.
Right, and if you aren't familiar with Austin's cultural history, especially in the 1990s, it was widely considered the slacker capital of the world.
It really was.
It was famous for this massive population of people just, hanging out, making weird art, playing in bands, and actively resisting the corporate grind.
Yeah, avoiding a real job at all costs.
Exactly. So the Luv Doc takes Crabby's question and offers a very specific theory about their disappearance.
And it's a theory rooted entirely in demographic and economic shifts.
Okay, tell me more about that.
The Luv Doc essentially argues that the slackers didn't disappear at all. They mutated.
Mutated.
Yeah. The Luv Doc vividly describes them spending years inhaling bowls of ditchweed and doing nothing until eventually they just got bored.
They got bored of doing nothing.
Right, and they started coming up with brilliant, actionable ideas. Suddenly, these former anti-establishment figures became successful artists, musicians, filmmakers, and tech entrepreneurs.
Oh, wow. So they literally became the very establishment they used to ignore.
Exactly. The doc describes them suddenly needing investment capital, and before you know it, they are ass-deep in the rat race, competing aggressively.
Trying to, cut the jugulars of their competitors to bring their unique visions to life.
It's a perfect illustration of how ambition alters ideology.
That makes me think of an indie band that prides itself on being totally DIY. You know what I mean?
Oh, totally. Playing in sweaty basements.
Yeah. They print their own T-shirts. They actively mock mainstream pop. But then they write a genuinely catchy hook. They get a little taste of success, and they sign a massive major label deal to reach more people.
Right, the inevitable sellout moment.
But the problem is, that major label doesn't just change the band's bank account. It fundamentally changes the audience that shows up to the shows.
Yes, you're not playing to the weirdos in the basement anymore.
Exactly. Now you're playing stadium tours sponsored by credit card companies to people who bought VIP lanyard packages. The whole vibe of the room changes permanently.
Because the very act of trying to scale your chill inevitably ruins the chill.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You cannot mass produce and monetize an organic underground culture without destroying the fragile economic ecosystem that allowed it to exist in the first place.
Because in the 90s, Austin was cheap.
Super cheap. You could afford to slack. When rent is $300, you can work part-time as a barista and spend 5 days a week painting or writing.
Right.
But when rent skyrockets, slacking is no longer an accessible lifestyle. It requires either massive generational wealth or extreme poverty.
And the Luv Doc actually does address that second group, the few original slackers who absolutely refuse to monetize their lives.
Yes, the true holdouts.
The doc says they are living in the squalor of integrity.
I mean, the language there is incredibly evocative.
It really is.
The doc says these remaining curists are paying the high emotional rent of authenticity and sweating out the sweet nectar of sincerity.
It paints a pretty bleak picture of what happens when authenticity becomes economically marginalized. Like, these true slackers aren't out at the new trendy spots.
No, definitely not.
The doc points out that they are hanging out in overgrown, weedy backyards in far south by southwest Austin.
Drinking cheap local beer.
Yeah, drinking cheap beer, swatting mosquitoes on dirty lawn chairs, and just complaining about dress codes, door lists, and tasting menus.
And their ultimate badge of honor is bragging about how they haven't been downtown since 2015.
Wow, 2015.
Which is the ultimate marker of how a physical city changes when the culture becomes a commodity.
Are you currently unclothed? Yeesh, that's only cool at certain resorts on the French Riviera, Hippie Hollow, and your backyard. But only if you have one of those slowly rotting wooden privacy fences your creepy neighbor likes to leer over while he's watering his rosebush. Otherwise, if you want to win friends and influence enemies, you need to get outfitted in some sick merch from the Luv Doc shop at thepleasurecraft.com. Are you a hard fit? We got you, boo. Plus, there are a variety of styles and colors that can accommodate any levels of uncoolness, even yours. So make a sensible fashion decision and hightail it to the Luv Doc shop at thepleasurecraft.com. Your body is counting on you.
If you want to maintain that true, unpolished, original culture, you literally get pushed to the geographic and economic fringes of the map.
Because downtown just no longer belongs to the people who made it interesting.
Exactly.
So if the people driving the culture either sold out or got pushed out, what happens to the physical city they leave behind?
Well, the doc actually pinpoints the exact moment the geography and the culture shifted.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the Luv Doc doesn't just gesture vaguely at a bygone era. They give us a highly specific cultural autopsy with exact data points.
Right. The doc points to South by Southwest in the year 2014.
And for anyone listening who isn't familiar with SXSW, it's this massive city-consuming convergence of tech, film, and music that takes over Austin every spring.
It started as a really gritty, independent music festival.
But it slowly morphed into a massive corporate marketing playground. And the doc zeroes in on one specific performance at the 2014 festival. Lady Gaga performing on a stage entirely sponsored by Doritos.
Yeah, the Doritos Extreme stage.
And during this performance, there were literal vomit painters involved in the act.
I mean, it's the ultimate juxtaposition, isn't it?
It's wild.
You have this attempt at edgy, visceral, grotesque art, vomit painting, but it's happening on a stage funded by a global snack food conglomerate.
Right.
It symbolizes the exact moment rebellion is neatly packaged, sanitized, and sold back to the consumer.
So the Luv Doc uses this 2014 moment as the tipping point where Austin became, in their exact words, a douchier place.
Which is a very direct way to say it.
Yeah. Very direct. And this peak corporate absurdity was immediately followed by the slacker abandonment of downtown Austin in 2015.
Because that is the underlying mechanism of gentrification in creative spaces.
Walk me through that.
It's a predictable economic engine. Grit creates authentic art. The art creates an allure. That allure attracts outside capital.
And then the capital demands comfort.
Exactly. And that demand for comfort ultimately kills the grit. The well-meaning people with money want to be close to the vibrancy, but they inevitably want to spruce things up.
Right. They want the cultural edge, but they want it with like air conditioning, valet parking, and a VIP lounge.
Precisely. And the Luv Doc uses a fantastic spatial metaphor to illustrate this transition.
The music venues, right?
Yeah, they contrast Liberty Lunch, which was a legendary, gritty, deeply beloved live music venue in Austin that closed down years ago, with a modern venue they refer to as the Skybox on West 6th.
The doc points out that fundamentally it's the exact same concept. People gathering in a room to watch live music and socialize.
But now you feel compelled to dress up.
Exactly. The core activity hasn't changed, but the packaging, the price of admission, and the required social performance have all been elevated for a wealthier demographic.
The friction and the messiness have been replaced by a highly curated, glossy experience.
Okay, so we have the micro-level behavior changes in the comments section reality, we have the economic evolution of the slackers, and we have the physical gentrification of the venues.
Yes, all those layers.
But the Luv Doc takes all of this localized cultural shifting and aggressively ties it to national political leadership.
This is where the tone really shifts.
It really does. Now, before we explore this next section, the doc links this local issue directly to national politics.
The rhetoric takes a very sharp, intentionally fiery turn.
Yeah.
The Luv Doc explicitly links this timeline of localized moral decline directly to the 2016 presidential election. The doc refers to the winner of that election as the Antichrist.
Wow.
Yeah, and argues that this national outcome, following the 2014 SXSW corporate peak and the 2015 slacker exodus, is all part of a singular pattern of spiritual decay.
The doc argues that it is fundamentally unfair to expect kindness and humanity from a generation that has grown up almost entirely in the shadow of the bloated orange ego of our supreme leader.
And the Luv Doc goes further to address the broader American electorate. They state that talking about compassion and humility feels like mere lip service when the country elected an ignorant, corrupt, senile megalomaniac to a second term.
And the Luv Doc also explicitly contrasts this figure with their political opponent.
Right.
The doc describes the opponent as a competent woman of color who was demonized with the exact same vitriol once aimed at Hillary Clinton.
The Luv Doc places the blame for this entirely on the voters.
Yeah, citing what he calls their repressed sexism, racism, and ignorance bubbling up into the ballot box.
He aggressively rejects the idea that anyone else is to blame for the state of the culture, using this highly explicit language to connect the rudeness in the streets of Austin to the results in the ballot box.
So what does this all mean? I mean, isn't there a simpler structural explanation here?
You'd think so.
When a city doubles its population in a very short amount of time, the infrastructure breaks down. Housing becomes scarce, cost of living skyrockets, and people become deeply stressed.
Traffic gets worse because there are physically thousands of more cars on the road.
Right. Lines get longer because there are physically more humans trying to buy coffee.
Ugh.
Couldn't this just be the unavoidable friction of a booming population rather than, a fundamental shift in human morality driven by a national politician?
That is the critical flaw in the Luv Doc's attribution. It's a classic example of macro versus micro analysis.
Okay, break that down for us.
It is psychologically much easier and, frankly, emotionally more satisfying to attribute this localized structural friction to a grand national moral failing tied to a despised political figure.
Oh, I see.
It gives a single recognizable face to blame for the diffuse, complex anxiety of living in a rapidly changing city.
It's kind of like a trickle-down theory of moral decay.
That's a great way to frame it.
The Luv Doc is basically suggesting that if the person at the top is selfish, it gives the guy in the Honda Civic permission to cut you off in traffic.
Exactly. It ignores the basic logistics of urban sprawl in favor of an ideological narrative.
Right.
Which brings us back down from this macro-level political rage to the micro-level personal advice that Crabby actually asked for. Like, how do you keep your sense of humor?
Yeah, because after this massive, sprawling rant about the death of old Austin and the moral collapse of the country, the doc gives a surprisingly raw answer.
He admits he keeps a sense of humor because he literally doesn't have a better emotional tool to deal with his own rage.
Right, he has no magic bullet. He just playfully, almost defeatedly, suggests to Crabby, maybe I should try some breath work.
It's a real moment of vulnerability. The Luv Doc is admitting that he is just as overwhelmed and exhausted by the cognitive load of the modern world as Crabby is.
But then there's a subhead at the very end of this column that completely flips the entire piece on its head.
Oh, yes. This part is wild.
It might be the most revealing part of the entire deep dive.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a stunning piece of meta-commentary that subverts everything we just discussed.
At the bottom of the column, the doc explicitly writes, share your comments below. Be spicy. We need clicks.
That line is the key to understanding the entire media ecosystem we live in.
The entire column is a lamentation about how society has become mean-spirited. Crabby complains that the world feels like a badly moderated comment section, full of people driven by ego and outrage.
And the Doc News writes a fiery political manifesto about how awful everyone is acting.
And then actively solicits that exact same toxic behavior to feed the algorithm.
It is a stark, almost cynical acknowledgement of the Luv Doc's complicity in the attention economy.
Yeah, totally.
To understand why this happens, you have to look at how digital architecture dictates behavior. Nuance, deep breathing, and gentle takes do not keep an advice column in business in 2026.
No, not at all.
The algorithm demands engagement, and the most reliable driver of engagement is high arousal emotion, specifically outrage.
Peace doesn't pay the rent. Outrage does. Partisan anger and spicy commentary are the literal currency of modern media.
The Luv Doc is diagnosing the societal disease while simultaneously selling the virus.
Wow.
He recognizes that to survive as a writer in this economy, he has to farm the very rage he is complaining about.
Because he hates the badly moderated comment section of the real world, but he needs his digital comment section to be unhinged.
Exactly. So he can generate the ad revenue to afford living in the gentrified city he just spent 1,000 words mourning.
It ties the micro, the macro, and the meta together beautifully.
It really does.
Crabby feels like the world is a badly moderated comment section. And the Luv Doc essentially replies, you're right, it is. No, please go participate in my comment section so I can get paid.
It's the ultimate paradox of modern life. We crave peace, but we consume and incentivize conflict.
Which brings this whole conversation right to you, the listener. Whether you live in Austin, Texas, or on the completely opposite side of the globe, this dynamic is universal.
Absolutely universal.
We are all trying to navigate environments, both physical and digital, that feel increasingly commodified, increasingly loud, and deeply polarized.
We're all trying to figure out how to maintain our chill when the economic engine of the world actively demands our outrage.
And that tension leaves us with a rather profound paradox to consider as we look toward the future.
It does.
So to wrap this up, what does this all mean for what comes next?
Well, if our physical cities are inevitably spruced up by capital, pricing out the authentic weirdness and turning local grit into corporate gloss, and if our digital spaces are intentionally designed by algorithms to farm our spicy outrage for clicks and revenue...
Yeah, where do we go?
Exactly. Where is the actual untouched frontier left? Where is the space for the next generation of slackers to simply exist, breathe, and do absolutely nothing without it being immediately monetized, gentrified, or politicized?
That is a heavy, lingering question. Maybe that's exactly what you can mull over today. Where is your untouched frontier?
It's something we all need to find.
Thank you so much for joining us on this Luv Doc. We loved unpacking this with you, and we will catch you next time.
To read the column that spawned this podcast, go to austinchronicle.com/columns/the Luv Doc. There are probably worse things to do with your time, right?